critical part, as it is in education.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with Coach Luca. In this week's episode, I'm delighted to welcome chairwoman and founder of Barton Inclusive Football Club, Sophie Bartup. It was great to speak to Sophie around inclusion, disability, and how this affects individuals, working with volunteers, and how to integrate this within an inclusive program and supporting both those individuals with disabilities and volunteers within that infrastructure. At the heart of this episode is disability and additional needs, as well as inclusion and how the club works and operates to support those who require the support within football and sport. Now, we talk about high performance, we talk about coaching, we talk about being a leader, we talk about how we integrate teams, but sometimes we don't talk about inclusion, we don't talk about disability, we don't talk about disadvantage or additional learning needs. This was a fantastic insight and wonderful, open and heartwarming episode whereby we were able to talk about the great work that the club does, as well as what Sophie does in her role as chairwoman. Now, there is so much within this episode, and I don't want to give too much away because there is so much within it. But she really looks at the heart of what the issues are and how she can support those with additional needs and disabilities so that they can be included to play the game they love, which is football. She works with her club and a fantastic set of volunteers who give so much time to her club to really help operate what is so needed within the community and for these individuals. She talks about legacy work in terms of how it could be developed further across England, as well as how it could be developed across the UK, for example. So whether those FAs work more inclusively, whether the FAs work more cohesively, then these will be great opportunities to develop the pathway for those with disabilities and additional needs. Within doing so, they'll have the opportunity to create a bigger pathway, more opportunities, i.e. more games, more training. But running a club isn't easy. I've been a founder and a chairman myself, and I could relate to what Sophie was talking about, but it was so insightful and empowering to hear how she supports her volunteers. Sometimes we expect so much from everyone who's involved, especially our volunteers, but we don't always understand what they're going through or how to support them. This is a great opportunity for you to reflect how you can support your volunteers at your clubs, your infrastructure, your inclusive programs, how to work with disabilities, as well as additional needs, as well as creating a pathway across many partnerships that can be developed. It was so great to have this episode because there is so much within there. It was great because I could relate to Sophie's experiences about running a club and what is required. Running a club isn't easy and comes expenses, comes difficulties, and then comes the logistics with the operations. Now, this isn't easy to manage to ensure sustainability, but Sophie is doing such a wonderful job with a fantastic group of volunteers. There is so much within this, such as strategies to work with those with disabilities and additional needs, opportunities to support them, opportunities to support volunteers, and how volunteers play an integral role within the founding of clubs, within the operation, and within the delivery. But this is a huge episode on inclusion and disability. I hope you take much away from it because there is so much within this episode, and it was so heartwarming to speak to Sophie. She was so passionate throughout and her energy was so life-giving right throughout. It is wonderful to see the great work that her club is doing. I hope you can check out Sophie across her socials, as well as check out what her club is doing and what they're doing collectively to support those with disability and additional needs. It is so great to see a club and a set of volunteers, as well as a chairperson, chairwoman, who is able to do a great job in supporting that, and there are many other great volunteers and clubs out there doing it. I want to continue highlighting this because we talk about high performance teams, leading, signing, recruitment, and so much, whereby we don't always look at disability and inclusion. So this is a wonderful episode in terms of those insights and how you can really support what you're doing at your club, or even think about what you can do to set it up. I hope you enjoy this episode because it was so great to speak to Sophie, and this is such a heartwarming and empowering episode. I hope you take care. You can find our podcast or the podcast across many socials. This includes Spotify, YouTube, Podcast Addict, and Anchor. You can also find it on LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and Flickr, as well as Pinterest, and then its own website as well. There is much coming, and there's loads up and coming, but this is this week's episode with Sophie Bartup. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you take much away from it. Continue to reflect, continue to add to your journal notes, continue to build and take much away. There is so much within this episode, and it is a huge thanks to Sophie. You can find the podcast at TRC Podcast _ on Twitter. It's a Reflective Coach podcast everywhere else. I'm Coach Luca, Anthony _Luca96, and I hope you take much away. Drop those likes, drop those follows, drop those comments. Don't forget to subscribe. It is really appreciated and helps the program, helps the podcast, and there is much to take away. Thank you very much for listening as always. This week's episode is Sophie Bartup.
Allowing behaviour to happen doesn't support them in their long-term development, doesn't support them into adulthood, but actually us putting boundaries and expectations in place, we can set boundaries and we can set expectations, but we also make sure we're flexible in the support that we give. We can see some fantastic outcomes, and we have seen some incredible outcomes. One of the first things I'll say to new parents or carer is, at the first session, there's no expectation on the player, there's no expectation on us as a club or as coaches, and there's no expectation on you as a parent or carer either. All we can do is let that individual come into the space. Yeah, well, thanks. How are you, Luke? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Good.
What's the weather like where you are?
Say that again?
What's the weather like where you are?
Stunning.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been out coaching this morning. Just bear with me. I'm just going to shut my door. My dog's just... No, come on. Yeah, I've been out coaching this morning. It was 15, which was... There was a nice breeze coming off the Humber. So, yeah, we did okay. It was stunning.
Even better when it's out coaching like this. It's been so up and down this year so far, hasn't it? It's, hot, cold, and then, this time last year or the year before, it was so nice. But this year it's just been so odd.
Yeah, we were hoping to get outside a little bit earlier, but we pushed it back till kind of after the May bank holiday. So, but we did really well this morning. So yeah, we can't complain.
Exactly. How are you on the back end of the season now, or is it just training, or?
Yeah, so we train all year round for our guys and players. So we've now got kind of the summer kind of events and festivals, and the club that we operate isn't your traditional kind of mainstream provision. So it's very, very, very sort of different in terms of what we do when we train. We don't necessarily have, we have a pre-season, but we don't necessarily have an off-season. It's important for us to maintain that consistency with our players and have that weekly kind of provision for them, really. So yeah, it's good. It's all busy all year. So yeah.
It sounds it, but it's good what you're doing, and that just sort of leads me into a thought question there, because working with some young people, which I do every day, if they're on the ASD spectrum, change can really affect them, and if something's not on and it doesn't sit right in their world, then all hell could blaze realistically at the best of times. So when it comes to yourself, then where you're all year round, when it comes to that summer, most clubs just stop. Whereas when you've got someone on maybe the ASD spectrum who looks forward to those sessions and that consistency and being with the coaches and that environment, etc., if you were just to stop, it could have a real negative impact. So it's good that you are still going, but I think it's that awareness for coaches, if they are going to stop something, have that build up and communication with the young people, because that change can really be massive for them.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's exactly the same for us. Having that weekly check-in with our players is so important. And as you said, if we were to stop delivering football for a period of time, then we know that the impact is going to be far greater than just the kind of physical aspect. So yeah.
Coaching route, did you always know it was for you when you started out in the pathway, or was it just something that you've ended up going down, or?
Yeah, so for me, really, my football journey started when I was really young. So I've played football for as long as I can remember. Football's been a big part of my life since I could probably walk. So, football has for me been something that's been really special in my life. And my sister plays football as well, my younger sister. My dad's a big Aston Villa fan. I grew up a Man United fan, I still am. So kind of football I knew would always play an important role within my life. And kind of, I suppose it was university really where my real kind of passion and love for coaching was ignited. I got involved with a grassroots football club at the mini soccer level and helped coach, and very, very quickly at a young age took on a team kind of independently. So that's really where my sort of coaching journey began, and very quickly I did my FA level 1. I was on the youth award level 1 and very, very quickly progressed through that with the support of the club that I was with at the time. And then through a referee that I knew, I started volunteering at a disability football club. And again, that's probably where I felt most that my skills and my kind of experience and the passion that I had, I felt that was probably the space where I felt most comfortable and felt that I could make most of an impact. So that was probably in sort of 2015 really, and kind of since then my involvement within inclusive football, with pan disability football, has been kind of a weekly commitment since then really. So yeah, I've been really lucky on the journey that I've had to have some fantastic mentors, to have some fantastic people around me, and to learn from some of the best volunteers. So yeah, it's been a fantastic journey so far.
No, it sounds it, and it's certainly a great one, and one that you've learned a lot from and been able to do a lot with, because you've gone on to be like a football development officer. You're currently a community development manager. You've been a chairwoman, and founder. You've got a wide range of experience, which has led you into great positions and doing what you're doing. So. When it comes down to it, then obviously sport can lead us into different fields, but we have that coaching, and then in terms of coaching then itself, it might be the elite player platform where we might want to go with professionals, or we might want to just do community and sport development, or we might want to do a bit of the academy side and then mix it up with other things. And then we got disability and additional needs and inclusion, etc. So is it more of your route now will be more inclusion, or will it be sort of going down the pro route with a bit of inclusion? What sort of pathway are you trying to look or go down to, say, next 10 years?
Yeah, no, that's a really fantastic question. I think I'm at a stage now where the football club that I founded is now just over 4 years old. So we're coming up to kind of a 5-year anniversary, which is, it's a big opportunity for us as a football club to really determine what direction we want to go in strategically, how we want to operate at a grassroots level. So for me, my main focus is on Barton Inclusive Football Club in terms of continuing to lead our committee of dedicated and passionate volunteers and to support the provision that we do. I do work full time, so my role within football is on a voluntary basis. And I think, to answer your question, will I diversify in terms of kind of what I do? I think for me, I know that my passion and my advocacy that I do is within the inclusive game. So for me, I'd like to say that within the next 5 years, I'll still be volunteering within disability football, within inclusive football, and working with the volunteers I do now, and hopefully recruiting, young leaders as we do, and working to support and change lives really through football, and football and sport as a real sort of platform to do that. So, I wouldn't say that I would ever be kind of closed doors to anything else, but kind of for me and where I see myself, I think that I'll continue to volunteer and work within the inclusive space, because it's where I really feel that I've grown as an individual, I've grown as a coach, grown as a person, grown as a chairwoman, and for as long as I'm enjoying it, and as long as I'm enjoying it, and I can give my energy, time, and commitment to the players and the volunteers and their families, then I think that I'll certainly be on that pathway for a long time.
And that's great to hear, and it's good that you are going to be on that platform and pathway for everyone who's going to be involved and get to know you over that period of time, because obviously having such a big impact is incredible in terms of what you do and that experience which you've been able to continue sharing and what you want to do, especially on a voluntary basis. Founding a club is not the easiest of things. I know I've been there myself, being a founder and chairman, and it's sort of you then have to amalgamate everything, and that becomes a full-time job essentially in itself, because there's so many different routes and things that we have to consider. How did the forming of your club come around then? Was it just a combination of ideas, or people getting together? Was there a strategy? How did it sort of come by?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. And I think for me, it was really kind of organic, really. So I volunteered at a disability football club based in Lincoln, and had a really fantastic experience and was hugely supported by their committee. I had the privilege of coaching a team who did really well in the FA People's Cup, the FA Disability People's Cup. And through my professional career, I eventually moved home in 2018, so moved back to Barton upon Humber, which is in North Lincolnshire. And I knew that I'd always wanted to volunteer and continue my volunteering journey, but within the town at that moment in time, there wasn't any football provision to support individuals with additional needs, or to support individuals with diagnoses that potentially provided barriers to play in mainstream football. And we live in a town in Barton who have a fantastic football club. We have a number of junior teams, and the football landscape within our town is fantastic. And it just felt right to continue to build on that provision with an inclusive club. And it was almost kind of an idea, really. And we hosted, or I decided to host an event locally to try and create a little bit of buzz about what we wanted to do, really. And a good friend of mine, Jen, who played in the England Deaf futsal team, she came and she was a fantastic guest speaker and hugely inspiring. And very, very quickly, a number of individuals said, you know what, I want to help. I'm not really entirely sure what I want to do, but I certainly feel like I can give a number of hours a week to help. And I had experience working for a county football association as well, so I kind of had that understanding of what was needed. I understood kind of the governance around creating a football club. I understood what funding was available, so kind of I had the basis really to try and take it forward. And we did receive funding, and we did receive strategic support from the county FA, which was fantastic. We received a football foundation grant as well, so we had everything that we needed from a strategic point of view to move forward. And I'm so pleased to say that very quickly after hosting our first session, we were able to develop and nurture a really fantastic, inclusive, safe, inspiring environment. And very naturally from that, volunteers came forward, and volunteers who maybe never thought that they were coaching football, but now are leading teams within pan disability leagues. And I think it does take a lot of hard work, Luca, but I've been incredibly lucky with the people who have gone, I really like what Barton Inclusive are trying to achieve, and I'd really love to help. And everybody that said that is still on that journey with us today. And very, very quickly we had to establish kind of some more procedures because we grew very, very quickly. We'd gone through a COVID pandemic as well. So I think everything that we learn is put us in a really good position today. We have individuals on our committee that have different expertise in different areas. We have a fantastic number of volunteers that take on different roles. So from my perspective, it allows me to kind of oversee it and ensure that I can focus on my full-time job, which is my professional career, but at the same time enjoy my volunteering and knowing that I've got a trusted network of volunteers and a workforce that is hugely dedicated and passionate is really kind of what makes our club sustainable in the way that we want it to be. So I cannot speak highly enough of our volunteer team. I could do a podcast for hours just talking about them. They're absolutely fantastic.
And it sounds incredible, and it's great that you have that workforce and the volunteers and people in place to support you, because running a club, as you say, isn't the easiest of things, and when you don't have the right people, then it becomes even harder because responsibility, accountability, everything else that falls on you then takes its toll, because there ends up being that long list which becomes then quite exhaustive. And once you stop enjoying volunteering and stop enjoying what you're doing, you end up putting in less time, that less effort, and therefore then it has that impact upon service delivery, the type of sessions, how you work with the young people, how you work with stakeholders, etc. So it's great that that infrastructure is there and you have that people, and it's important to have those right people who are willing to give that amount of support. And I was very lucky in the sense that I had the right people around me which set up our club, and we went down a great platform as well. But it's an incredible story about what you're doing in terms of Barton, because that's a club that's very different than most clubs, trying to be very inclusive. Because if we were to highlight how many clubs, say in England alone, and then how many were just inclusive clubs looking at additional needs and disability, what would be the percentage in terms of that?
Yeah, no, and it's a really, really great question. And I think for us as well, the way that we're operating right now, and we've expanded into the city of Hull. So we have a expansion project called BIFC Hull, which is fantastic. And we have an under 12s, we have an under 16s, we have adult pan disability football, which is fantastic. And whilst we're really, really happy that we're welcoming players now almost on a weekly basis, we feel that it's also important that a wider football landscape as well start to ask questions around how they can be more inclusive and how they can develop inclusive teams. Because up and down the country, across our county, North Lincolnshire, East Riding, Hull, there's a large number of fantastic grassroots clubs that have the ability, the facility, the infrastructure to support and engage with inclusive teams. So it's a really great question, and there needs to be more opportunities for individuals to play football that can't currently because of societal barriers, or it's not the right environment for them to play mainstream. So, we're really, really proud of what we've achieved as an independent inclusive club, and we're certainly keen to see more grassroots community clubs, England accredited clubs, take on more responsibility for engaging with and creating inclusive teams, because at the moment we travel to South Yorkshire to play. We'd love to see more teams within North Lincolnshire, within Hull, within East Riding, to ensure that we can have more local leagues and it's even more accessible for our players, and it supports their engagement with the game. So yeah, we're playing our part and we're doing a fantastic job, but we're also really keen to help and support and mentor the clubs locally as well, to try and do what we're doing to create more competitive structures for individuals to play the game, and by playing the game, increase their opportunities away from the pitch as well, because we know football is such a fantastic driver for supporting mental health, well-being, and other aspects of individuals' health. So yeah, it's exciting for us to be doing what we're doing, but we're really keen to see more growth within the inclusive game.
It sounds incredible, and certainly exciting, because if there's not a documentary about this club and what you're doing in a few years' time, I'll be very shocked, because when you start out a club and you say, right, we're just going to work on disabilities and providing that platform, you might have already had, say, like a 5-year vision, and how that may have looked in just terms of having this platform and then these types of sessions and who you want to engage with. But then you go down that route, and then suddenly you're going into other clubs delivering sessions on their behalf, or you're partnering up, or you're going in delivering sessions on their behalf, or you're setting up sessions and programs for them and then letting them off. You're going in and delivering coach education. You might be working, as you say, to set up leagues, and there's a whole expansion of other things which can grow and grow and grow, and that might even then come down to the research and then the best practice, and then how you recruit volunteers, and then how you develop that coach platform. And there's just so much which can establish from it and become the absolute foundation, where Barton are at the heart and the soul of that disability support network, which is very exciting just to think of how big this can go.
Yeah, and something really interesting you said there about supporting and helping and mentoring other clubs. We know there's many clubs locally to us that are run fantastically, that have really strong and passionate and dedicated committees that are delivering 20 plus teams. However, there really does need to be an understanding of what's required to support an inclusive team, or what it takes to support a mental health team, or what it takes to support people with a physical disability. So you've got the infrastructure in place, which is fantastic. You've got the volunteers, but then there's another added layer of how you support those players, how you understand those players, how you listen to those players, how you empower those players. And often in some cases, our provision might be the only thing that they do externally other than being at home for the week. So it's understanding how we can support the player, but beyond that, understanding how we can support the parent and their families as well. So it's not just planning a session, delivering a session, and delivering a match day. There's much more that we have to do as a committee, and we often have to attend meetings on behalf of players and their families if we're working with social workers, or if we're working with children or looked after children. So there's definitely an extra level of understanding that's required, and we're really keen to ensure that we can help clubs do that and help clubs deliver. We know that often our players can be triggered by certain things, and it's understanding not just having the coaching qualification to deliver quality football sessions, but providing the training to our coaches so that they understand how they can support our players, they understand how to recognise changes in their behaviour, and fundamentally they know how to report it. But at the same time, we have to support our volunteers to ensure that they feel valued, and that they're comfortable and they're happy with what they're dealing with, because often it can be quite complex cases that we're working on, and we're working with volunteers that are giving their time freely. So we really have to understand as a committee how we support our volunteers, how we work with them, and how we provide them a platform really to learn in a safe place. And yeah, there's a lot more that goes on probably compared to a mainstream football club, and it really takes a level of understanding and experience to do that, and having somebody that can do that, and having more people in the club that have that experience and expertise is really, 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 really critical. So we need to get that right if more clubs are going to do what we're trying to do. We really need to get that right.
Absolutely, and there's absolutely a key fundamental there to certainly pick on in terms of getting things right, because when you are working with people with disabilities, obviously they have IDPs then in place, and then they might have individual people plans which then support them, and the risk assessments which go into it, and then you touched upon social workers, because then as you get with people with disabilities, and the network opens up in terms of then that social and care work, and then the type of work that you do, and then there might be a family's first intervention officer, or there might be that support network, and then suddenly there might be a range of other partners who want to understand what you're doing or have that participation, and suddenly it takes an interest in terms of what you're doing from the wider scale. So, there's a lot to consider when working with those with disabilities, and especially for volunteers, because it's great to have that support for people with additional needs and what they need, but it is sort of difficult as well if you're jumping straight in and you're not having that training. Yes, we learn on our feet, but I know I was thrown in the deep end a few times and I wasn't trained, but it's difficult then at that point. So it's great that you have that infrastructure for those volunteers, so you can give the right support to the young people coming through, because I've had a lot of experience working with people with disabilities and inclusive sessions and mainstream and alternative ed, etc., and at times it's been really difficult, because upon this mainstream you can see kids or young people with disabilities who have tried to be part of sessions, they've ended up being turned away rather than maybe being signposted to something that may be more convenient to them, or may be beneficial, because they have that disability or additional need, and it's easier for, say, this coach who's stuck in his ways to sort of go, right, no, not for us, or you can go somewhere else, because he doesn't want to take on the extra responsibility of that inclusion or understanding the kid, the family, etc.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point, and often in my experience, we work with players at Barton Inclusive Football Club that often have tried to play in a team when they're younger, and it's not been right for them, or as you said, the coach at the time or the club at the time hasn't had the opportunity or ability to support that individual. So quite often we have players that join our club as adults that have maybe not played in 10, 12 years, and that's, in our opinion, that's not okay. And there needs to be support for clubs. If there's a player that's accessing provision from a young age, then they might get to a period or a time in their life where actually playing mainstream isn't the right environment. So there needs to be that referral, or there needs to be that pathway for them to engage within an inclusive space. And the club that they're currently at have a responsibility to play in that, as do County FAs, as do the Football Association. And I think what's really, really, really great for us is that we do have the capacity to understand the player. We do have the understanding to work with the families and work out what is right for the player. And often, I also run a cerebral palsy football team, and one of the first things I'll say to new parents or carer is, at the first session, there's no expectation on the player, there's no expectation on us as a club or as coaches, and there's no expectation on you as a parent or carer either. All we can do is let that individual come into the space and firstly, get comfortable with it so that they know it. And then what we'll do is we'll work as a group with the player having a voice to understand what we can do and how we can find solutions to support that individual. And I think often in mainstream that probably doesn't happen as much because it's mainstream football, and the players should arrive and they should train and they should play and they should go home. But for us, it's a huge part of what we do. And if we didn't have that connectivity and communication with parents, if we didn't have that open space as a collective group of coaches to try things and make mistakes and learn new things, then we wouldn't be able to retain our players, because we're not putting them at the centre of what we do. And with our cerebral palsy team, we have a really, really fantastic group of coaches that challenge each other in terms of, how shall we deliver? Do you think this would work? Shall we try this? Let's speak to this player's parent to understand if we can develop this further, or is there anything that we need to speak to the player about? And it's that constant evolving conversation, and it's that reflective practice as a coach, and it's encouraging that player and that parent or carer to come on that journey with you. And that doesn't mean that you're having multiple conversations with every single player's parents every week. You're not. You're responding to changing the players' lives, or whether that's physical or whether that's emotional, whether that's social, and you're taking the time to really consider how what we do as a club, what we do as coaches, impacts on that player. And a big part of that is listening to players and listening to their families as well. But at the same time, which I think is a really fine balance, is that these are volunteer coaches as well. And there's no expectation on them. They're not professionals. They're not being paid a fee due to their expertise. So we have to ensure that the volunteers are supported right, so that they can support the players, but at the same time the volunteers are only capable of doing what they're capable of doing, and with help and support and guidance and a really cohesive ethos of collaboration and connectiveness between the volunteers, then we can move to that as well. But I'm very, very clear that if it gets to a point where it's out of the capability of a volunteer or it's beyond what's expected, then that's probably where we need to bring in other agencies, and that's probably where we need to highlight an issue. So there's that fine balance between supporting the volunteers to the best that they can, but also understanding that they're volunteers at the same time. So, and that's something that as a committee and in my role as leading the football club is we're constantly asking ourselves that question. At the same time, make sure our volunteers are happy and feel valued and enjoy it. And I said at the beginning of this podcast, for as long as I enjoy this, I'll continue to do it, because I know when I'm enjoying something and I'm happy and I'm smiling, those around me are getting the absolute best of me in terms of my values, knowledge, and experience. So, yeah, I'm smiling now because I'm thinking about our volunteer team and thinking about the tremendous job that they do. And we're really lucky because our families and players, are really appreciative of what we do. And it's also nice to get that feedback as well. And we're really keen to create that family kind of spirit and environment of support and guidance and encouragement. So yeah, it's a tough job, but it's a reflective kind of place that you need to be continually, really, and it's a healthy place to be, I think.
Absolutely. I was going to say you can definitely see the smile and the energy radiant off you, and in terms of when you were speaking and what you were saying. And when you are speaking like that, it just shows how much that you actually love it, and that is within you. And it's great that you have that understanding for the volunteers in terms of what their expectations are and how to support them. Because I was going to join a club once on a voluntary basis, and I knew the chairman. And the first thing we had about a discussion about me coming in, he's like, I'm a tough grafter, I've got big expectations, and you're going to be having a big workload. I was like, mate, this is voluntary football. I said, I get the understanding of the commitments, and there's a lot that goes with it. I've been in it for like 7 years. But it was just the way that you automatically went, you're going to be doing this, this, and this. I was like, right, come on now, realistically. And it's difficult then, because as you are trying to get in volunteers and they're trying to fit in around their lives, they're there to try and make that difference. And the moment that you put too much onto them, the easiest thing for them is to go, do you know what, I can cut volunteering out because I'm not gaining any time, I'm not gaining anything from it, I got to pay my time, I got to pay the fuel, I got to travel, etc. And that's usually how volunteering goes. So it's much easier to cut that off. But it's great that you have volunteers come forward, and it's great that you've got this ethos in terms of what you want to do and how that fits in. And when people come forward, it makes things so much easier. But when it comes down to, say, a coach approaching yourselves and saying, look, I want to get on board, I want to be part of your club and do this, do you do any sort of personality testing or any recruitment in terms of the actual selection around individuals that come and approach you about getting on board? Or
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. And our BIFC Hall provision, we've recruited, they're very, very kindly offered to volunteer 3 coaches in the past 2 weeks. And they're all coaches that are known to us that are either, parents or carers of players. So they've had, a long time to understand who we are as a club. They have experience as a parent in terms of the offer that we provide. They know who we are, they trust our values, they trust our provision. And when a coach or a volunteer comes forward and says, I want to coach, what's really, really important is first of all, that's where their volunteer journey starts. And we talk about player journey, we talk about player care, but our club and my personal kind of leadership style is that volunteer journey is just as important. So when a volunteer comes forward, they're not going to be a fully fledged coach in their first session. However, what we need to do is we need to harness their inspiration, their passion, their initial motivation for wanting to volunteer, and then we need to provide them with the right tools and resources. And there's lots and lots of conversations that happen before they take to the field. And, of course, you've got your safeguarding, your DBS that runs parallel to that. But speaking from a support network and a mentoring point of view, we have lots of conversations with our coaches as well. And whilst we need to safeguard the players, we need to safeguard the coach as well. And if we're allowing a coach to go onto a field with a diverse range of players who have very different complex needs, we need to safeguard that coach's experience as well, because we want all our players to have a positive first experience with our football club, or as positive as it can be. And we also want the same for our volunteers as well. So we do a lot of work in terms of, shadowing initially. So they'll shadow coaches and We'll bring them into conversations, we'll bring them into WhatsApp groups with the wider coaches, we'll share session plans, we'll take time to listen, and we'll encourage them to start to take a lead at their own pace. Alongside that, they'll be working on their BT Playmaker course, they'll be working on their FA Level 1, and additionally, if there's any extra training, whether it's around autism awareness or whether it's around mental health, then we'll provide them with that as well. And I think, you go back to when the chairman said to you, look, I'm a hard referee, I expect, we expect from our volunteers what they're willing to give. And whatever that is special for us, because it's somebody that's willing to help and give their time to help our football club. So we do what we can to help our volunteers. Last year we had our end of season awards. Additionally, we had a thank you night for our volunteers as well, which we feel is really important. It gave our volunteers an opportunity to not have to worry about players. Just for one night, they could just relax and we could talk to each other and we could thank each other. And I asked a few players and parents to send me a few words, and my speech was kind of the voice of our parents and the voice of our players, which I hope was really special for our volunteers. And I think for us, it's providing a network around the volunteer as you would do with a player. And there are going to be times where situations escalate and complex situations arise. However, if they're confident and feel competent in everything that we've done, then that experience, we'll be able to learn from it. It won't be an experience that they look back on negatively. It'll be something that we can learn from. So for us, the volunteers are at the heart of everything we do. We're looking to do it for the cerebral palsy team. We're doing a team building day. We've organised for all of our volunteers to go on a canal boat for the day. We've asked each volunteer if they feel comfortable to bring a different team building exercise, and really we want as much laughter from that day as possible. They work every week with children with complex needs, and to have that opportunity to come away from the football pitch or away from the sports hall and get together and build our internal relationships, we feel is really, really, really important. And for me, on a personal level, I'll always continue to champion and advocate for our volunteer network, because without them, our clubs and our teams wouldn't be the life-changing spaces that they are for so many young people and their families. And I truly believe that our volunteers deserve the time and space to learn at their own pace, and we need to listen to them. It's not about us saying we need this role, can you do it? It's about listening to their strengths and what they want to give, and finding a role that meets their needs. And having that open conversation and that ability to listen to a volunteer is absolutely critical. And it's a large amount of my time is around supporting our volunteer network. We have fantastic coaches on the ground. We have an excellent welfare officer. We have a treasurer and marketing officer that are all operating and doing what they can to support our club. And now, as a chairwoman, a lot of my time is around volunteer support and volunteer engagement. And it's a really fantastic place for me to be really.
And it sounds great that you're going to give back to the volunteers and have a volunteer night for them. And that canal trip sounds something very different, but it sounds great as well, especially on a day like this. It'll be incredible.
Yeah, we're not going till September, so we'll see.
Well, hopefully it'll stay as nice, but I think that's just something nice, having that day out and just being together and having those conversations and just giving something back to them, because, I've done a lot of volunteering over the years, and I know when I left my first club and I spent about 4 years there, and I put in, about 1,000 logged hours that I kept track of. Originally, when I first started, I was doing it part of volunteering, and they asked me to keep a track. And then once I finished that sort of volunteering bit, I kept going with the club, and I just continuously, naturally logged it ever since then. But all the amount of hours that I ended up putting in, then I just ended up leaving the club, and there was no thanks or anything for that. I felt a little bit kicked in the teeth, but at the end of the day, I know who I impacted. I know who I maintained having good relationships with. I know what I enjoyed. I know how I was able to grow, and I know what I was able to bring to it. So I was glad that I could actually take away what I knew that I enjoyed from it. But I think it's great that you're giving back to the volunteers, and they're very lucky to have a chairwoman and committee and that support structure in place like you, because having them on board and giving something to you is really important. But I'm all about that two-way street, whereas I like to try and replicate the efforts where, if I got a member of staff in work who I know has done something great, I'd like to just give them, a little Christmas card or something at Easter, just to show, there's a thanks, it has been noticed, hasn't gone unnoticed, and it's just an appreciation for me. So I think what you're doing is truly great, and it's great that you say that. And I absolutely love the quote about life-changing spaces. I think that's a great one, and what you say there is a really important point. And working with these people, it's just so important to get the right people on board and making sure the right infrastructure is there for them. So when it comes down to that coach then and that coach education, going back to say maybe that person on the ASD spectrum, say it's a day like today, it's absolutely beautiful, you've been out training, and then the expectation on Tuesday is to go and train out in this weather again, but suddenly it changes, and then you're in a sports hall and you've had to move there, you've been able to book it last minute, and then you've got to take that group from the field into the sports hall, and then you have these ASD individuals who are not able to cope with that change of what their expectation was from outside to inside. To be the coach leading on that might be something quite difficult to sort of understand and replicate in terms of their feelings around why they may have those barriers. And as you said earlier, those barriers are key to understand. But if you were saying supporting that session and that transition between grass to indoors, how would you go about supporting that young person then in that scenario?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think it's a great question around, change and how we support our players. And I think for us, it's having an understanding of each individual. So we take the time to get to know the individual and understand, how certain changes may affect their behaviour, or certain changes may trigger their behaviour. So if we have a circumstance where we need to change a facility, or we have a circumstance where there is a last minute change to a venue, we know our team, we know our players, and we know who we might just need to give a little bit more direct instruction to, or we know that who we need to adapt to the way that we communicate that. And I want to give an example of a team that we have called Inter Barton FC. They chose to call themselves Inter Barton FC, which is fantastic, and that's a team which has a high number of players that have a diagnosis of autism, and they have a coach called James, and they also have a volunteer who supports James called Lauren. And she has a really fantastic understanding of the players. She's fantastic at observing their behaviours, changes in their behaviours. And she communicates with James, and she communicates with myself, and she communicates with the players and parents around how to support. So if we have a change in circumstance, it's our volunteers and our coaches that understand our players. So, for example, we know that the weather can be a really big factor. If the weather's potentially cold, or it's raining, we know that a player might need just some extra support and reassurance that it's okay, it's still safe to train. Not every player needs that, but it's really down to that kind of player-centered approach to how we do things. And I think that's really critical. And for us, we often have quite extensive travel times as well to our venues, because we play in the South Yorkshire Ability Council League. So recognising how travel can affect different players, and we can do things as a volunteer team and a coach team to support and help and make sure that journey is less stressful for those players. So I guess it's really down to understanding your players. It's the communication that you have with the parents. Quite often, I'll get contacted to say, this individual has had a really difficult week at school due to this, and I can then cascade that communication down to our coaches so that they're prepared, to support that player. So I think two things for me that come out of that. The first is the player-centered approach, so understanding your players and how different changes in circumstances can potentially be a trigger. So that's really important, because not every player is the same. And then secondly, it's the communication and the relationship that we've built with parents and carers, so that, we don't want a parent to drop off a player in crisis. Do you know what I mean? We want the parent to feel that they can bring their player to our provision, but there also has to be that understanding that if they're not able to come and participate within that session, and it will be a detrimental effect to their own well-being and the coaches and the players, then there's that as well. Do you know what I mean? And it's that honesty. We're a football club, and we're there to support the players, but at the same time having that clear expectation with players, parents and carers. And we'll often get players messages saying, I've had a really difficult day and I'm feeling particularly angry. I'm not going to come to training tonight because I want to clear my head in a different way, and we support that. But then sometimes we'll get a player saying, I'm feeling really, really apprehensive, I'd like to come training, but if I need to leave early, I'm letting you know. So it's not a case of, well, that player's just left the pitch, that's not acceptable. It's okay, well, that player now has made that independent decision to leave the pitch and leave the session because they feel that they've got to the place where they've done enough. So knowing your play is really, really important. And, we all make mistakes as well, Luca, as coaches, because we're just trying our best. But again, it goes back to the openness with coaches. And if a coach can say to somebody else in our club or myself or welfare stuff, I did a session today and I didn't quite handle the situation the right way, or the way that I felt I could have done. It's about having that open communication and learning, and we try and get together as much as we can. It's difficult because we're volunteers, and if you've come straight from work to a session, you're not getting home till 9, half 9. But we try and have, clear and open communication, and there are certain coaches that take a lead on that as well. So, finding the right people with the right personalities and skills to kind of initiate those conversations is really, really, really key as well.
I love it, and it's great that you have that communication around it, and coaches that take lead on it and support those young people, because you might be on a coaching course and they say, all right, you might just have to adapt with the space you've got, you just have to put up with the weather. And yes, we do, and it's great to be adaptable, and it's part of our skill set, especially working with those with additional needs, etc. But then it's not so easy when we think of the participants and flip that on its head. And I think some of the coach education that comes around that from a national level, as much as they are looking at the coaches, I think they forget to flip it on its head and look at the players, because you've got a fantastic club there, but how much of it is actually inclusion based in terms of that national platform and that education? Because you take that group and suddenly you have to adapt. It's not just so easy just to go and adapt. So sometimes you might go, right, do you know what, we're moving to that sports hall, but then on the other occasion it might actually be easier to say, do you know what, we're not actually going to train tonight, and just say it's off because of the weather, because this young person might process and understand that in a different way than making that change. And it's just tailoring towards the needs of every young person, because that perception of what we might have in one way to what that looks to a young person or a person with additional needs is very different in terms of how they may portray or understand how that comes across, for example.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, we've had experiences in the past where we've had Friday night training and we've worked with a player who has had a particularly difficult week or is struggling with their mental health, and we've made the decision that that player will not be playing on the weekend's fixtures. Now that's to support the player themselves and to safeguard the player. It's to support the coaches, the volunteers, and the other players within their team. But at the same time, and again, we're really big advocates for this. We want to develop our players as footballers. We want them to improve their skills and confidence on the football pitch, to become better sports people and to enjoy their football. But also, we want to help them develop as people. So if they come to a session and something happens where they become anxious or where they become stressed, that's okay. Their emotions that they're feeling are okay, and we can support that. However, there becomes an expectation that certain behaviours are not acceptable within our football club. Every player signs a code of conduct, and whilst we understand they have different needs, we want to ensure that there are support in there if a code of conduct rule has been broken, because if we're not doing that, then we're not providing a long-term kind of pathway for these individuals, and often it's a really difficult place to be, where you have to work with a player because they've done something that is not acceptable and it's not echoing our values. However, we understand why it's happened, and again, they're really difficult conversations, and we'll work with our welfare officer and we'll work with our volunteers and their families to support that young person, because allowing behaviour to happen doesn't support them in their long-term development. It doesn't support them into adulthood, but actually us putting boundaries and expectations in place and doing it in a way that's supportive of them is a really, really important part of what we do. And again, that's a very, very, very big expectations for volunteers to do. And as a football club, we are prepared to talk through those scenarios with players and parents. And every conversation we have, we always make it really clear. We ask the player, who's the most important part of this conversation? It's the player. And often they won't answer, it's me, but it is. And for you to develop and for you to enjoy being at this football club, we have an expectation that you behave in a way that meets the values and ethos of our club. Okay, and that doesn't mean if you make a mistake or you do something wrong that you're asked to leave. It means that we work with you and we try and understand why it's happened, and we work with their family to try and help them move forward in a positive way. And we've done that many, many times, and it's the part of operating a football club that isn't the part that we enjoy doing, but it's certainly a critical part, as it would be in education. Emotions are okay in the way you feel okay, but actually how can we support that behaviour post event? And again, our volunteers do a tremendous job, and being honest can sometimes be really difficult, can't it, with a player? But actually, you've got the integrity to know that actually what you're doing at that moment in time is absolutely the best thing, in your opinion, to do to support that long-term player's engagement within football, engagement within education, engagement within society. So it's a very, very sensitive topic to discuss, but I feel like we have we have a fantastic opportunity and a role to play within this individual's life. And if we can set boundaries and we can set expectations, but we also make sure we're flexible in the support that we give, we can see some fantastic outcomes. And we have seen some incredible outcomes that we would never have expected. And I always think back sometimes, that was a really difficult decision for us to make as a club. But it's been evidence to us why we made it, because that young person is now flourishing. That young person now is able to reflect on their own behaviour, and that young person now is able to look at us and go, thank you for that help. And it's really important that we have that way of working as well, I think.
Absolutely, I love it, and there's so many key points which you're saying there, and that's why I'm quickly jotting them down as you're saying it, because I want to go off this one, ask that, and that's key. And I think I absolutely love that you say support behaviour post event, because understanding behaviour is key for any young person and any person in general, actually, in terms of their reflection and how they approach it next week, and how they might understand the actions behind it, or the way they may have responded to communications, how they may have perceived it, as we said. But those boundaries and expectations are very important to have. And especially with those with additional needs, because having that boundary and expectation then creates that pathway and that consistency in terms of what the expectations are from the coach, then in terms of the environment, what the club, and so on. And it's not always easy to get those boundaries and expectations across with a person with additional needs, because they might have global delay, or they might be on a certain place on the SD spectrum, etc. So it's very important to have that sort of in a prospect. But I think I love that you say it's I can't remember the word you use now. It's a tough sort of conversation to have around that, because sometimes you want to talk about the behaviour and expectations with maybe a parent or carer, etc. But then it's quite difficult, because they don't want to understand that it is the behavioural expectation, because they're like, oh, they have additional learning needs, or they've got this disability, and therefore the behaviour then is excused and therefore then allowed. And that's why we see behaviours then transfer into education in the sessions, and then we have to sort of go in and give that education and support them. And I know that I had one young person, he came from 2 different clubs before, and his dad was banned from the clubs, etc. And I was like, right, why is the dad being banned? It's obviously around his conduct, etc. So can we educate him? Can we rebuild the relationships between parent and child, and what the expectations are around the club? And how can we support this young person and see whether they have any additional needs as to why their behaviour and performance is this way, hence to why they've ended up moving so often? And we ended up creating a real good pathway around this player, which then supported them and created very clear boundaries and expectations for that young person, but allowed us to then talk to the parent and have that education around understanding of why they might be performing in certain ways, and why, say, dad was reacting towards his performances, and therefore why relationship was being impacted, etc. So it was a real good way of us sort of diagnosing the problem, but then looking at it and supporting the family then on a long-term platform. And something that we used was empathy mapping, and it worked really well for us, and it was something that led to the young person understanding what their expectations was. So then when this young person went back into sessions, the coaches automatically knew what the expectations were. They knew if the child reacted one way, then how they could respond, or what the supporting strategies were, and it just allowed the young person to really understand that if the X, Y, and Z happen, then you're going to leave the session, and then we have to have that time out and then come back into it. And it was all tailored towards the needs of this young person, but it allowed us to work and improve behaviours, and therefore his enjoyment improved, relationships improved. Dad ended up having great integration. He was able to see his child playing a lot more. So there was a lot of outcomes and benefits because of the expectations that we instilled and put in place.
Yeah, and I think Luca hearing that is just a fantastic example, and a huge well done to everybody involved in that process, because I can imagine that took a great level of empathy and understanding and time. So that is a fantastic example to hear, and it's pleasing to know that that's happening. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a large number of external factors that are at play within any player's life at any one time, and we have to be aware of them, and we have to understand them as well, and a lot of the things that we can't control as well. So there needs to be an acceptance there. And I think, again, I take it back to the expectations within our football club. So we're an inclusive football club, okay? So that doesn't mean that if a player is struggling with mainstream, they can come to our club and do what they want when they want and behave in the way they want, because that's not supporting the player, that's not supporting them as a person. And through our club, we do have high expectations on our players because we believe in them. And I think that's really, really, really key. So our under-16s at BAFC Hull won their Respect Award for their league. At Inter Barton, who I've mentioned on the podcast before, they won their Fair Play Award for their league across 4 divisions. And that's because we're not scared of addressing difficult situations. We want our players, whether it's with our club or whether they move to a different area or whether they move to a different club or whether they progress, to understand what it means to be a footballer, and with that comes a level of responsibility, because you know, when you're wearing the badge of the football club, and that's, you know, a real privilege for you as a player, but also for us to have you represent us. So it's not a case of a player can come and, you know, and use that as a space where there's going to be no consequences, because that's not how we feel is the right way to run a football club. We want to treat these individuals with the respect, and we, you know, we believe in them, and a part of that is ensuring that we have the mechanisms in place to support, you know, and at the same time to celebrate them as well, because often a player at our football club, it may, you know, may take them a couple of weeks to learn a new skill, or it may take them a couple of months, or it may take them more than a year. So it's at the other end of kind of that spectrum is, you know, rewarding and praising and constantly reinforcing that positive message around what it means to play for a football club that, you know, has values around respect, togetherness and inclusion. So and that's why I really love the youth modules, Luca, because it was around, you know, it was around the environment, isn't it? And if we can create a safe, honest, open, caring environment where people will hold each other to account, then that will support our players. And I want to be really clear here that not every player will have the capacity to understand certain situations. So again, it comes back to understanding the player, doesn't it? If a player has a good understanding of what is right and wrong, then we can support them. But we will have players that have different levels of cognitive understanding and different awareness levels as well. So we have to be very clear that this is not an approach that meets the needs of every single player, if that makes sense. We absolutely need to ensure that every player is on their own pathway, that the players have a voice, the parent or carer have a voice, and that the volunteers understand the players and respond, and we move forward. So again, we can probably take this conversation in a different direction, but, you know, we're really clear that to represent our football club, you know, we want individuals that are able to display you know, the right behaviours in the right way. And again, it's reflective of the Respect Award and the Fair Play Awards that our clubs have, you know, received this year. And that goes to the parents and the volunteers and the families as well, because it's a reflective of our club approach. You know, we expect our parents to go to games and, you know, to clap both teams, to encourage both teams, to praise both teams, you know, ours and, you know, opposing clubs. And we hope that they'll allow our coaches to do their job. And if they do have an opinion on the sidelines, we very much hope that they're able to approach volunteers in the right respectful, professional way. And we put a lot of time and effort to cultivating that culture within our football club as well. And there's been a lot of players that have gone through journeys with our football club where there's been some really, really difficult times, but I'm proud to say they're still playing with us, and they're now leaders and role models within their own teams, you know, helping to inspire the next generation that come through our club. So yeah, really, really, really proud of, you know, our players and what they've achieved. And you know, you've just got to keep going sometimes, haven't you? And knowing that everything that you're doing and putting in place is, you know, is for you know, an outcome that hopefully supports that person in the best way that it can.
Absolutely, I think it's a testament in terms of what you're all doing, and it's fantastic to have won those Fair Play Awards. And not only that, then, as you say, those players who have become leaders and what they've been able to integrate, I think just shows success stories in itself, even if you weren't to win those awards, and the impact of what you're having and what you're doing, which is incredible. So it's big well done to everyone involved, and it's fascinating to certainly hear about it, and it's great to have those expectations and what you put in. As we say, that conversation could go in a different direction if you wanted to, because, you know, you might have what's right and what's wrong in terms of those expectations at the club, but then suddenly you might have one parent carer who go, well, actually what you say is wrong is actually condoned as what may be right to them, and therefore then they have that. And I know I've worked in education where we've sort of gone, right, this is our policy and these are the expectations, etc., but then we've had parents carers challenge that, and because it's not what their expectations are, and therefore then that perception of understanding is very different to how that may look. So if we were to look at Sophie yourself in terms of what you're doing, so are you more excited by having the strategy leading up and being responsible in that sense from an operational point of view and direction, or do you miss being hands-on or actually prefer being hands-on? So if I was to say to you, right, tomorrow you got a choice of full-time coaching, or I want you to take off the coaching and just being involved in strategy, etc., which one would you have to choose?
Do I have to answer that?
Yeah.
I think if you put me on the spot, I think I'd choose coaching. Being on the ground with the players and seeing, hearing, feeling, experiencing the difference that we're making collectively as a volunteer team. And I'm very, very lucky in my role as chairwoman that, again, I love my role around supporting volunteers and providing a place for them to engage with qualifications and develop on their own pathway. I really enjoy now supporting our strategic partnerships and building on our relationships with sponsors. I now, support our treasurer with funding and grants. So there's that direction is great, because with any decision that we make, we can bring in our players, we can bring in our volunteers, we can bring in our players and families, which is great. But for me, nothing will ever compare to being on the football pitch with the players and seeing them achieve something that they probably never thought they would achieve, or even their parents thought that they would achieve. And I remember we were in Doncaster, and it was the first season that Inter Barton played in the Disability League, and they won their season, they won their division on the last day of the league, and they had a big cup, and we'd very, very kindly been sourced a minibus from Barton Town FC, and we was in a car park in Doncaster at 4:30 on a Sunday afternoon. I think we were the only vehicle left there. The place had practically shut, and one player just looked at me and said, "This is the best day of my life." And I'm getting emotional now, because it was one of the best days of my life as well. So that feeling that has stayed with me, and in the times where it is difficult running a football club and you have to deal with situations that you don't go into volunteer and potentially deal with, days like that, being in the car park in Doncaster at 4:30 on a Sunday, being the only vehicle there, it seems bizarre to say that was one of the most profound, proud, inspirational moments of my life, but it was. So if I had to choose, I'd just stick with the players, Luca. Come on, it's no brainer. There'd be less paperwork and less, that kind of thing. So yeah,
absolutely. And it's just a question I asked because I've been in a similar position, because we went from being a team to a club, and therefore I went from being a team manager to a club chairman and head of coaching, and suddenly that change between roles in terms of that expectation of heading something up and forming partnerships, looking at sustainability, looking at our policies, looking at recruitment, everything that goes with it. And I ended up having to be very operational in terms of what my needs were, and therefore it took away from being with the team. So then at times I was really enjoying doing the strategy, etc., because I thought, it's great leadership, it's great experience, it's great to be doing this, it's great to say, we're able to do this as a club and replicate the energy that I'm able to put in. And sometimes when it took away from being on the grass, then I was like, I actually enjoy trying to get the infrastructure of the club up and running and seeing what the results are for other coaches at this point, because I've been part of the process and I've been a coach for 7 years, but it's actually great to be on the other side and see the coaches come through themselves and what they're doing to support them. But then when it came down to it, I ended up attending our FAW grassroots conference at the end of last year, and I actually then realised how much I actually really miss being on the grass, and my motivation was being impacted because I was actually spending more time doing all the strategy, etc., rather than being on the grass and coaching, and therefore that's why I decided to step down as chairman last year and tried to stepped up to under 19s at a different club, and I had to make a very tough decision to allow the club to transition at that point to another chairman, another person, especially when it was a great project and place to be, and something that we've been part of for many, many years, and it had naturally led to us evolving the club from where we started as an under fives team in terms of philosophy and what we're doing. It was very tough to walk away, and I had to leave my team after 7 years of being with them, because I was like, I have to get back on the grass and I have to look at working with the players and where I want to go in terms of my own coaching journey at that point. And it was a great place to be, and even they played this morning, and I saw on their Facebook, they're out and the club is still operating and going in a good direction. I'm glad the infrastructure is still there to do that. But being in our positions when we're going up to being a chairperson and, having to make those crucial decisions can really take away from being on the grass and have that impact. But I think you've got the right choice there of working with the players. So if I ever, unfortunately, have to be dragged at the board level and I need someone on the grass every day, I know who I'm giving my first phone call to.
No, that's really, really kind of you. And you've made a really brave decision there. You've done what's right for you, and that probably means that you're loving what you're doing now. You're working on the grass, and I don't coach on a weekly basis, Luca. I am the chairman of the football club, and I like to go to training to say hello to people. It gives me a real sense of identity and belonging as well as a volunteer, and I enjoy going to our games and watching our players. It's quite nice because I can go and I can chill out and I can be a fan. But today I did have to coach. One of our volunteers is in Italy on holiday, and I was stood in an orange rectangle of cones which turned into a jungle, and we had different jungle animals chasing around with bibs as tails, and I thought, you know what, I feel so silly, but actually I'm having the best fun. And every now and then I'll have to cover a session, and I'm at the time I'm secretly quite chuffed that I can do that as well, because it's not something that I get to do on a weekly basis now. We have fantastic coaches, managers, support workers, volunteers that deliver our sessions, but to have that kind of opportunity to bring you back to why you first did it, why you dedicate so many hours, why you're up till the earliest hours of the morning, while you're bringing your family on the journey, while you're potentially sacrificing time with your family, being on the grass like I was today, it was fantastic. And it's what first ignited my passion, and the drive that I have is down to the players that I've worked with. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be sat here today, because they're my source of inspiration, and they give me purpose. So yeah, days like today were really good. So yeah, I'll probably be back next week to just go down and say hello, because all the coaches will be back. But yeah, I've enjoyed it while it's lasted this week.
And it's good because sometimes you might re-find yourself, because I was there at under fives age and doing those types of games, and I remember working with tots, and I remember they would sit very close to listen and they would be dribbling on your hands, and you'd just be like, oh, okay. But that's how you started out, and you just end up naturally enjoying it. But as your pathway ends up going on, and you work in an academy setting, and it becomes a lot more serious, intense, and that ends up being stripped away from you. And I remember going back to a top session last year, and I was like, oh my days, how did I do these sessions many years ago and do it week in, week out with any problem? And it was hard, because then I sort of reflected, and I was like, do you know what? I actually put more time into my overall coaching, in terms of actually putting maybe 30 hours a week coaching across the board in terms of planning and etc. At the club I was at years ago, but now I'm stripped right back in terms of a nice amount of hours, which is good. But it's also showing, maybe I'm not enjoying that as much as I was, because I'm not putting in the amount of hours. So it was good that you enjoyed it this morning, because as we sort of go down that journey, it's good. Do you know what? I want to be a club secretary, or I want to be a chairperson, or I want to be head of coaching, etc. You end up having that pathway where you go, right, this is my strategy to get there, etc. But then sometimes you might go, all right, I'm actually at this point, but I actually really miss being at this point and doing this.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like I said, for me, my kind of love for what I do now with Barton Inclusive Football Club and the cerebral palsy team that I help to run, it was being on the grass, it was being with the players, and it was seeing the difference that each individual made on their own journey. And for me, as well, you mentioned around the amount of hours that you dedicated as a volunteer. We're very conscious that, if you volunteer for an hour a week, yes, there'll be some planning in place. And if anything happens, or a player gets hit with a ball, and, you have to check in with their parent the next day to make sure everything's okay, there's that expectation that, you've got to do that. But at the same time, it shouldn't impact on your work. It shouldn't impact on your family. It shouldn't impact on your other interests as well. And I think that's why we have, a large network within each team, because it's not just on the coach or the manager. There's support in place around that team to help that volunteer, because I want every player to come to our football session and go away in a better place than when they came, and I want that for our volunteers as well, and they deserve that as well, because they're the absolute best people within their local communities doing the work, because they want to and because they want to help. So I'm very, very, very clear as well that volunteers, they might just need a week off as well themselves every now and then, to spend the day with their family, or to go, do you know what, in a really, really tough week, I'm going to take a week off. And that does happen. Volunteers do come to our club and say, I'd just like tonight off, or I'd like next week off, or at the end of this month, I'm not going to be there, kind of thing. And I think that's really, really, really healthy. And my volunteers or our volunteers certainly say to me, "You're not coming this week. You're staying at home, or you're doing this." And I think that's really healthy. That I'm accountable as well, because if I'm saying to our volunteers, "Look, this should be something that contributes positively to your life. It shouldn't be difficult. It shouldn't be something that you're thinking, oh, do I still really need to do this?" And they'll say to me, "Look, Sophie, you're on holiday, put your phone down, or everything's fine, look, come on, just take a week off." So and we have that with each other as well. We have that openness and accountability, so that's really, really healthy. And especially if we've had a particularly challenging week, and again, all our players had a particularly challenging week, it does affect you, doesn't it? Because you don't go home and just forget about it, you go home and you worry. So again, the expectation of the volunteer isn't to be there every single week and be on your absolute A game every single week. The expectation is that we hope that you enjoy it, and we hope that we're listening to you, and we hope that you feel empowered, and we hope that your journey is just as transformational as the players. So yeah, it's important.
Absolutely, it's important. But as you say there, when a volunteer might decide to have some time off and maybe need a week off, etc., there you've been at a session this morning and now filming a podcast yourself this afternoon. So where's your time off?
Yeah, it's a great question. But like I said, I'm off to Greece on Wednesday for a week. Is that okay?
That's very good. I think that actually trumps that question. So where are you off in Greece?
I'm off to Lefkada, an island, never been before. But again, just another thing, going away for a week knowing that your club is in the best hands with the committee, with the coaches, because when I first started, I felt like I couldn't leave for a day. And now I feel like our club is sustainable with the volunteers that we have. So, there'll probably be 6 or 7 sessions for our club while I'm away. And I know that each of them are well supported, and each of them has a fantastic network of volunteers. So it's wonderful as a volunteer to know that you can go away now and you've got the best people, doing incredible work. So I'm really proud that we've been able to get to that space. And I'll always coach, but at some point, I'll be ready to move on in my role, and knowing that, as you did with your club, knowing that there's people that and younger people that can come in and and take our club forward is really, really fantastic, because it's about a legacy of this football club, and it's going to affect a lot of people for a long time. And I'm only playing my part at this moment in time, and again, for as long as I'm enjoying it, I'll continue to play my part. So we've always got to think about the wider picture of how it impacts our players, how it impacts our community, how it brings people together, and how it makes people happier and healthier. So yeah, I love it. I just love it. I love what we do, and I feel really privileged to volunteer, and I'm very, very grateful for everything that I get back in return, and for the balance it gives me. So yeah, it's brilliant. I feel very lucky.
I love that, and it's very true, because years ago, I know how you felt when I first started. I actually couldn't bring myself to pull myself away from trainings, or have weekends away, or just have a weekend off. I just actually couldn't fathom someone else taking my sessions with the team, even if I had assistant coaches. So it actually got to one point within maybe 4 years in, there was only one time I ever missed a session, and I cancelled that session, so it didn't take place, because I just couldn't cope because of the amount of hands-on energy that I'd been with the team, that I didn't want someone else to do it. But whereas when we finally moved on to the club I was at and I was chairman, I had the right people in at the right time that I could trust, and actually got to a point where I'm happy to miss things and things to carry on and evolve without me. And I think that's a really important part of our process and journey as well. And I think another point there is, in 30 years, say when I'm, in my 50s, if the club is still existing and there's a different chairman in place at that time, or chairperson, then it's a real good thing that I was actually part of that journey, and I started it and I was part of it, and it's great that the club still exists and someone's in that position that I once held, and it is great for it to still carry on and have that legacy. So it's great that continues, and it will continue with you. But Greece sounds very nice on Wednesday. My parents just came back last week from a week in Santorini, so I was very jealous of that. So whoever you're going with, I hope you have a wonderful time. So it should be a nice one and some downtime for you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Really, really, really looking forward to it. And it's a big part of, a lot of our volunteers work full time, Luca. So having the opportunity to take some time away, I think it's really great. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to getting back as well. Forward to being back on the grass and back with the volunteers and getting back to my job. But yeah, it's nice to go away, and it's nice to go away knowing that everything's in a good place. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Well, before you say about coming back and whatever, just actually enjoy being away first before you actually get back on the grass. But it's 4:10 on a Saturday afternoon with the fantastic weather. You've had a fantastic week, and I know I said I was going to throw some scenarios at you, etc. But I don't want to take up any more of your time on a Saturday. But it's been great to have a conversation around what inclusion is and how this may look and what your examples are and how you may exemplify this in terms of what you're doing from a club approach and strategy. Which, for me, in the back of my mind, if I got grassroots coaches who are heading up teams or being part of something or want to set up programs, or they're aspiring to be in those positions, or there's chair people listening, etc., or committee members, or those listening from professional clubs, it's great to certainly have that perspective in terms of what clubs are doing, what they could do, how inclusion may look, how they may impact young people, how they may think about the way young people think, how they may work with parents and carers, their education. So for me, it's been thought-provoking in the sense of how that may come across, and it's been great to hear about that fantastic work that you're doing in the whole club within yourselves. And as I said, I hope there's a documentary in a few years, because this sounds like something that can continue to be very, very exciting. But I do really appreciate the time, especially on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm glad we could get this arranged. But we'll definitely have to get you on again and chat about other things, because there's so many questions that I have for you, and we've ended up alluding to a lot around what your club is and what it's formed. But I think it's provided that fantastic perspective to really consider. But big well done to you, and if I could send you a Premier League trophy for yourselves, then there's one that should be on its way.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And if I can be sat in my living room in 20, 30 years' time and turn the TV on and see a documentary on Batley Inclusive Football Club, I'll be very, very happy, and I can look back and say I played my part. But you're absolutely right, we've got the best people, and thanks ever so much for having me on. I'd love to be on again, and it's been a really thought-provoking conversation for me as well, and I've learnt a lot, and I've loved hearing parts of your story as well. So yeah, a big thank you for having me on, and it's just great to be connected with you, and I appreciate the invite, Lucas, so thank you very much.
Likewise, but no worries, it's great to be connected and great to have that now, and enjoy Greece, and we'll definitely stay in touch. But thank you again from me, and good luck with what's to come.
Amazing, you take care. Thank you very much.
And you, thank you.